afternoon, everyone. I'm really glad to be back with you again. We're going to try and do this on a weekly basis if we can both find the time. And I'm really happy to have back on my dear friend and colleague, Fiorella Isabel, a journalist and analyst based in Moscow. And I recommend everybody follows her Substack. You've been extremely prolific lately and putting out excellent analysis that certainly doesn't follow the mainstream, either the mainstream or very much independent mainstream, which is adopting its own kind of mainstream dominant narrative within the independent media sphere. And we can perhaps touch on that a little bit. But I wanted to welcome you, Fiorella, and just first of all, let's talk about, well, I mean, President Trump is on a bit of a rampage at the moment, generally, both
Mhm.
internally and externally. But I wanted to pick up the subject of effectively the shutting down of USAID,
Mhm.
which, of course, everybody knows to be a CIA outreach agency and a kind of infiltration battering ram used against target countries for decades since its creation, in fact. And a lot of people are kind of celebrating this as being part of Trump's declared policy to drain the swamp and so on. And so quickly, I'd just like your opinion on what is happening, and then we can go a little bit deeper.
Right. So first of all, this is Trump's role. Okay, let's get that right off the bat. Trump is the president that is attempting to appear like he is fixing everything that was purposely broken by the Biden administration. Everything from the internal domestic economy to our foreign policy with Gaza to all of our interventions in abroad, specifically the Ukraine war, and of course supporting Israel's genocide in Gaza. Everything that the Biden administration did. Now Trump is being um, the symbolic leader that's going to come in and clean all of that up. But what he's really doing is continuing the same foreign policy, just pivoting to a different direction. And when we look at the USAID, this entire arm of the intelligence apparatus has long been known to those of us who have been looking at intelligence operations, covert operations, have been looking at NGOs and the National Endowment for Democracy that have been looking at how the United States and its allies in NATO have been interfering in elections and overthrowing governments in Latin America, Africa, all over the Baltic, all over Eastern Europe, and of course, West Asia. So this is nothing new, but it so happens that because the former administration was Democrat, the Trump administration, which is a Republican administration in the United States, is coming in and waking up and using people like Elon Musk to basically present this idea that, oh my gosh, we just completely leaked all of this information, and look, it's we're revealing all of this to all of you. We're going to clean up the swamp. We're going to expose all these corrupt globalist Democrats, etc. Right? But the problem is these globalists are not just Democrats; they're Republicans, and it was the Trump administration that largely supported USA during his first run as president and largely relied on it through their operations in, for example, Venezuela. Venezuela was the area where Marco Rubio actually went to the border between Colombia and Venezuela with a delegation. He actually led a delegation there. And he said that we could not afford to ever stop the funding of USAID because these operations help promote democracy. And so my whole thing is we're not denying that an actual dismantling of an arm like USAID would be a great thing if it was separate from the intelligence apparatus that operates as our government in the United States. And so
Mm.
what is really happening is a distraction that Donald Trump is saving the day, that the Republicans are exposing all of this and are exposing Samantha Power, who was the head of the USAID, and are showing the world that they're down with corruption. What is really happening is it is being transferred into the State Department, where Marco Rubio, now our Secretary of State, has named himself the head of this agency that he so fervently believed in for so long, and is basically going to control this and centralize it now from these sort of soft power, covert, pro-democracy operations to a more overt type of operation that is centralized, and which Elon Musk, who is this technocratic billionaire oligarch that has been backed by Palantir, by the Department of Defense, and is trying to get his hands on every facet of big tech in the US, of big social media platforms to control it, is he is now also a very huge part of this. So what we're seeing is a centralized power vacuum of more privatization of this apparatus. It is not going away, because in order for US aid to fully go away, we would have to change the essence of the government of the United States, which is essentially a US military apparatus, intelligence apparatus, that operates as a constitutional republic, but truly isn't, based on the fact that there is no direct, like there's no allegiance to the people, there is an allegiance to these corporate sectors. And all this is going to do is basically reinforce those allegiances now, just under Donald Trump.
Well, and also, I mean, how I look at it very much also, you know, people before could go to the USAID website, and I think this caused them a lot of problems. They could go to the website, they could basically track where the funding was going, who it was being used to fund, how it was being used to interfere in sovereign country affairs, and they were pretty much exposed, you know. And I think so. This for me is it's going to go back underground, as you said, be privatized, be absorbed back into the security, intelligence, government, State Department structures, and no longer be visible. And this reminds me very much of something that happened, I think, about a year ago with UK Column. We used to track the British government spending over £25,000 to any organization, and every month they used to produce a spreadsheet, right? When at UK Column they produced a kind of a system by which people could input the company they were trying to find out about and so on, and they could basically track much more easily what the British government was giving money to and what for. And it was kind of leading to a huge number of freedom of information requests. All of a sudden, guess what? That spreadsheet disappeared off the government website. And that's on a kind of smaller level, but it's still very similar to what's going on, I think, with USAID. I think it's just going to ground because the CIA operations were just too visible for people once people figured out what was happening with USAID and how it was being weaponized. And the same goes for all of these organizations. And we see it all the time. When an NGO is exposed for its criminal activity at the behest of the US State Department, the military, or the security agencies, it gets shut down, right? But it reappears as something else with the same directors, the same people running it, or if not the same people, at least people with the same foreign policy agendas, as you mentioned, with Marco Rubio. And so I think we're just extremely, you know, I'm with you. I would be extremely happy if Trump was shutting down USAID and this entire structure was never going to come back into operation again. But I'm totally with you in that I just don't believe that's what's happening. And I think those who are celebrating it are doing so extremely prematurely. I mean, even remember, when Turkey was saying, okay, no, we've stopped all trade with Israel. While what were they doing? They were just farming it out to NGOs and shipping companies that were not affiliated to the Turkish government to continue doing exactly what they had been doing
Yeah.
anyway, which was supporting a genocide in Gaza. And this is exactly the same kind of smoke and mirrors, I think, that's going on
Yeah.
with Trump. And I think you've touched on the kind of very far-reaching consequences of what he's doing. And I just wanted to touch on what's happening with the 2 million federal workers who effectively now have to decide, what is it? The Department of Government Efficiency has decided that they need to decide whether to resign their jobs or to stay on past a government imposed deadline and risk getting fired. Now, a lot of people are interpreting this again as Trump, doing the right thing. But is it, or is this just all of these actions at the moment, to me, appear to be a huge leap towards America becoming even more of a totalitarian state, towards wholesale privatization, right? And again, this going underground of information regarding what the state is up to.
Exactly. So Trump is the king of smoke and mirrors. I mean, he's participated in reality television. He is a real estate mogul. He is very, very good at doing the WWE type of wrestling, which is fake. Everything is fake. And so this
Mm,
is how he operates as well. And when you look at what's happening with the government workers, it's not an all or nothing approach, meaning a lot of people in the United States do complain about the fact that our taxpayer dollars are going to fund things that we don't want. We pay a lot in
mm,
taxes, especially if you live in California or New York, where you basically pay almost half of your salary sometimes in taxes. And you normally, hey, if you live in a country that gives you healthcare, gives you education, has a nice roads and a
mm.
transportation system, people don't mind as much. But we have none of that in the United States. So clearly, people have been getting extremely upset about where their tax money is going. And oftentimes, when you deal with a government funded entity, there is a lot of disorganization, there is a lot of just delay. A lot of people do actually just collect a paycheck. It's not everybody like Donald Trump is making it sound.
Mm.
But I think the bigger thing is that this entire stripping away of the civil service of the people that work in government is just going to open the door to a more nefarious technocratic network, not just by Elon Musk, but by the bank industry, the central bank, the Fed. And it's interesting because a lot of these people that say that, they voted for Trump because he's going to drain the swamp, of one of the major influences of overthrowing governments abroad and controlling where the money is the Fed. And a lot of these people normally want to do away with the Fed, but this is actually empowering them. It's going to empower them, and it's going to make what's left of America, as you say, as what has begun a decline into a totalitarian state, which, by the way, is not only Trump. It has been going with Biden, with Obama, etc. But I have to say that because otherwise people think, that I'm just an anti-Trumper. But it's basically just channeling all of that into a center, getting rid of, for example, congressional oversight, getting rid of the other layers of the United States that provide a checks and balances, and it's just going to put it in a centralized area that's not even the executive branch. It's more or along the lines of what Elon Musk is trying to operate, the Doge, or however you say it, entity that he's trying to
Yeah.
use. And if that is so, Elon Musk's dream is essentially to create a all everything app, which would be X, right? And via this, you're gonna have the use of more perhaps a crypto, but it's gonna be a centralized crypto. And the entire point of having Bitcoin or having alternative currency has been that it's not controlled by the government and it's not central controlled. It's blockchain. It is hard to trace, and it's been embraced by people who are anti-establishment or who have problems with the government, looking at all of our spending and all of that. But if you put crypto inside the US government, it's going to be a centralized, not decentralized type of platform. And then it's going to allow people like Elon Musk to have more control over the access to perhaps what you're doing, what our banking statements are. And
Mhm.
on top of that, you're also going to have the expansion of the sector, the billionaire sector, which are all of Elon Musk and Trump's friends that were also, by the way, happened to be in attendance during Trump's inauguration. Mark
Yeah.
Zuckerberg, Amazon's Jeff Bezos, and all of these all of them were in attendance because they know that this is essentially happening. And the goal, I think, of this is to funnel power into these individuals, and basically while promoting the idea that we're holding all of these agencies accountable, they do the same thing, the same type of foreign policy operations that we've been doing. In fact, Donald Trump's foreign policy, for example, that he had before during 2019 regarding Venezuela and China is going to come back. It's likely to come back,
Mm.
especially with the pivot from Russia, Ukraine to now China and perhaps Iran, and trying to isolate China and also trying to create friction with Iran unless they succumb. And
Mm.
all of this is entirely connected because people will have less of a say, less of an ability to look at what's going on in the government. And it's actually very nefarious because it's being thrown at them like this is an unraveling of things when it's really a reshuffling of things.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, Panama's backed out of the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yep.
And Trump has certainly come in with all his foreign policy guns blazing. He's very clear, and I think the danger is, I mean, we'll come on to Trump and his Gaza policy, which, if you believe what is being said, even took his own administration by surprise. But I tend to be a little bit cynical about this kind of thing, because to me, part of it is creating this image of a maverick Trump, and people kind of fall for it because then they start thinking, oh, the 5D chess game, like maybe he's throwing this curveball in to actually get Israel to leave Gaza, but then what? This is always my question. Yeah, but then what? And when you see the meeting between Netanyahu and Trump, and of course Netanyahu was the first buddy to be called into the White House, right, since his inauguration. And we know already that Trump has just taken all the gloves off as regards supply of heavy grade munitions to Israel. For what purpose other than to exterminate the enemies of Israel, and by default, the enemies of the United States in the region. And Netanyahu presenting him with, what was it, the golden pager, which is just the depths of like terrorism support. I mean, it's just disgusting. I was trying to come up with the words to describe it this morning and I just couldn't. It's just unbelievable, the amount of children and civilians that were killed in that terrorist attack, and it's becoming, like, this is just obscene what happened with the presentation of a golden pager. Oh God. But that's acceptable. And this is the thing, people just aren't seeing this, the depths of depravity to which the US administration has stooped. And I'm with you. It doesn't matter if it's Trump or it's Biden or Obama or Clinton. They're on the same track. They just might come at it from different directions and with slightly differing agendas or different approaches, but it's the same roadmap. And, when Trump is bullishly talking about getting rid of all the Palestinians, basically, now that could be seen as maverick if it wasn't being picked up by the Israelis as such a marvelous thing. They like Israel Katz has basically come, yeah, we can send them all to Spain, Ireland, Norway, and Canada, all the countries that dared to go against us at the ICJ and accuse us of genocide. The thing is that the Palestinians, of course, they're not going to leave their territory, their land, their homeland without putting up a fight. But does this now mean that America enters directly into that fight now that Syria has been weakened? I mean, I'd like to get, your opinion on where you think this is going to go.
Yeah. I think we both knew that after the ceasefire, this is where things were going because the ceasefire was brokered by the Gulf states as well and the United States. So you're not going to have the interests of the Palestinians at heart. What you're going to have is every attempt to pacify and just pivot away from that to act like it's being resolved. But really, what you're doing is you're expanding the Abraham Accords and you're expanding Greater Israel. And Donald Trump had already told Bibi Netanyahu that he was committed to doing that before he even became president. And so when he became president and this ceasefire magically appeared, it was no question that this was going to be the intent of Donald Trump, because he's not going to say that it's Israel that's going to take over the Gaza and rebuild it, and also the West Bank. Clearly, that's what Israel's already doing. But it's going to be the United States, and the United States is going to benefit from this economically. So here we go. We're doing America first, right? We're gonna benefit the United States for helping usher in this peace ceasefire deal with the Palestinians, and we're gonna develop Gaza, and we're gonna help these people. In fact, Trump's press secretary said, "How could you expect people to live under these conditions where there's nothing left?" Which is contradictory to what they were saying as it was happening, saying that Israel was doing nothing wrong and wasn't hurting anybody. Now all of a sudden you have them admitting that there's literally nothing left, and how do you expect people to live there? But what they're not saying is, well, who started this? Who helped fund what Israel did? Who literally carried out Israel's aid for this genocide? And so this whole thing, when people try to justify what Donald Trump is saying, it is ludicrous. It's not just it's obviously morally wrong, but it's also based on infactual principles. Because when you're talking about, that this could benefit Palestinians, this is nothing to do with Palestinians. This has to do with the US always exploiting a crisis, whether it's domestically, as we've seen in California, Hawaii, Florida, all over the global, all over the south of the United States, where we've had hurricanes, or whether it's in, for example, Haiti or other nations where we exploit a disaster, whether it's an earthquake, a war, a hurricane, whatever it is, and profit from it. It's been called disaster capitalism. You can call it disaster exploitation, but it's essentially what Donald Trump is trying to do. Why? Well, he's a real estate mogul. One, his son-in-law is Jared Kushner, who has already been talking about building luxury real estate in the West Bank and obviously in Gaza. And so now this is just perfect for the US to do it, and you'll have idiots like online social media influencers who will say this is actually a good thing because US troops will protect Palestinians, and they will look out for them and stop Israel from attacking them. One, US troops have been there. Two, they literally work hand in hand with the Israeli offensive forces. So I don't understand how you would even remotely get that out of this scenario, how you could even push for that, because it's just not factually correct. And you have these realities that are being completely just ignored by so many that are just wishing to see the good in Donald Trump. And for me, it's not necessarily about good and him being good or not, or because US Americans especially tend to like make heroes and villains out of people in this very, very childish way, where you're watching a movie from Marvel or something. Like, and Donald Trump is like the hero, and Elon Musk is like his sidekick, and the villains are it's just very reductionist. But this is how people tend to view it. But what I've been seeing on social media is very worrying, because Gaza is an issue that the majority of people, even some of the most vile people, have said, okay, yes, this is wrong. This is a genocide. This is ethnic cleansing. But what Trump's actions are doing are giving Americans from the United States the ability to pat themselves on the back and pretend that they're once again saving the world, entering into a Middle Eastern country yet again, as if they've ever left any of these countries better than they were before, and creating this idea that it's absolutely justifiable, because otherwise the poor Palestinians just couldn't take care of themselves, and we're just gonna protect them. And it's being taken as a serious analysis or a serious opinion that this would actually help, that there's no other solution. And it's crazy, because we keep reproducing the same type of sociopathic, narcissistic people that promote this type of idea of America first. And I gotta say, the thing I want to say, Vanessa, right now, is a lot of people have tried to make America first a good thing that is separate than American imperialism. But it isn't. It isn't. It is absolutely intrinsically tied to US imperialism. It is the same thing, because America first means, and has come to mean, only the United States of America, and everybody else just stops counting.
And I think, yeah, you were absolutely right. I couldn't quite understand why people were talking about US soldiers coming into Gaza as if that would be something new, because they're already there with the Egyptian security services manning the checkpoints to search and scan the Palestinians' cars as they head back to the north of Gaza, which is the most decimated. Not that there's a huge difference between any of the areas, on behalf of Israel, effectively. So they're working for Israeli security. And the THAAD missile system was sent with American soldiers to basically man it. So, this isn't something new. And I don't think Trump, when you listen to his language, he doesn't consider Palestine as anything to be taken into consideration or respected. He sees it just as, what's his name? Michael Huckabee, his ambassador to Israel, considers there's only one state, and that one state is the Zionist entity, right?
Yep.
And so for them, the priority is to expel, the Palestine, the annoying resistance and the Palestinian people, and put them somewhere else where they'd be so much happier. And I think also, even if because this has been a plan for decades, right? I mean, from 1948 onwards, this plan was floated multiple times throughout the history of the Zionist occupation. So it's nothing new. But I think the danger is what's happening now, and people are not even realizing that the language and the idea itself is getting normalized, right, by Trump.
Yeah.
So even if he doesn't do it right now, the idea has been put out there, and people are discussing it as if, like you said, as if it's a realistic and sensible option. And that's the frightening thing
Yeah.
for me, right? Because even if he doesn't do something right now, if he does it in the future when he's provided distractions for people in another direction, and he gets on with doing this, or America does actually enter the ground and start forcibly ethnically cleansing Palestinians from Gaza in particular, right? Then people are not going to be paying attention because they've kind of had it imprinted upon them that this isn't such a bad idea after all, you know. And at the same
Yeah.
time, what is America doing here in Lebanon? It's effectively, Israel is so pissed off basically that it didn't destroy the Lebanese resistance. It didn't destroy Amal and Hezbollah, and the resistance against Israeli land grab inside Lebanon, even among Christian factions here, Sunni factions, and so on, that support Hezbollah and support the Lebanese army if the army is going to be reactionary against Zionist aggression and violation, of course, of the ceasefire, which was inevitable. But now we have the US representative basically telling the newly elected president that, by the way, you can't have Hezbollah in the government, despite the fact that Hezbollah represents a majority in the country. So this is insane. So at the same time as Israel is bombing and supporting HTS terrorist attacks from Syria inside Lebanon, which I'm sure nobody in the West is hearing about, and America is sending representatives here to basically pressure the government into excommunicating Hezbollah from any government position. Like it's just insane that America, and this is Trump, it's not Biden, it's not Obama, we're in the Trump era right now. And I'm with you again. I don't support Biden, I don't support Trump because I don't support the ruling elite in any country, actually. But particularly in America, because they're responsible for the misery globally. Well, since America was kind of spawned out of its own genocide of indigenous peoples anyway, but that's another whole thing. So I think,
Yeah.
And you've also got Saudi Arabia, of course, that has massive influence here in Lebanon, that is developing its influence in Syria, and we'll come on to that with Russia in a minute. Saudi sort of looking to normalize relations with Israel, which has also been a major part of the agenda of the United States, right? And the Palestinian issue is kind of a thorn in the side because Saudi Arabia knows that it can't normalize or be seen to normalize officially with Israel until some kind of Palestinian state is created, because its own people will not accept this total dematerialization of the Palestinian national identity and so on. And so now what is Trump saying? He's now saying, well, Saudi Arabia they've got space. Like, it's quite incredible. If people actually stop and realize what he's saying, he's moving people around like they're cattle, not like they're human beings with homes and as centuries of history and connection to their lands. He's talking about them as a commodity. They're a bit in the way. Like, I need to develop the waterfront properties. I need to get my hands on the Palestinian gas. We need to create the free trade zone. And they're just in the way. That's how it's coming across. But people are kind of not, they're far removed really from empathizing with the victim of what he's actually talking about.
Right. And I think just part of that is because they already celebrated the end of the ceasefire. And and I'm talking about Westerners, specifically Americans in the US, because obviously I'm not going to take away from people celebrating the end of genocide, at least the halting of this genocide. But in a way, they're justifying it because they're saying, well, okay, at least the genocide stopped, and now people just look the other way, and pretend that what Trump is doing is better than what Biden would have done. And that's kind of what it's just exhausting because we go from one to the other every single time, and they do things to basically continue to divide people into these two zones of Democrat and Republican while simultaneously enacting the same type of foreign policy. So you have, whenever Biden's there, you don't see people talking about the mass deportations that have gone on under Biden and Obama. And you don't see the people out in the streets protesting that. But when it's Donald Trump in office, the Democrats talk about the harm done to Palestinians. They talk about immigration issues. They go out and protest. The same thing happens though. Now the Republicans are talking about USAID. The Republicans are talking about corruption in government. They're talking about the overspending in certain sectors when they do it too. But now because it benefits their party, they only push these issues out loud. And so what you see now, whether it's in Gaza, for example, is an overt type of policy by the Republicans. They're just what you're seeing outwardly on that side domestically. The Republicans are essentially conducting a coup and shifting the treasury, the power. The money structure to the Democrats. They just through more administrative that implement this idea of humanitarian aid or some sort of democracy spreading. But at the end of the day, it's the same type of nefarious empire that is acting not on the behalf of the U.S. public, but on the behalf of themselves. And so it really, these two issues, whether it's USAID or Gaza, are completely related because in order to control and expand the control of Israel, which is the United States' military bulwark in the region, as said by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they need to get rid of the pesky Palestinians. They need to move them elsewhere. And so they're going to have to get that done, not only to appease Israel, but to continue their own foreign policy ventures, especially when it comes to the fact that they know that the dollar is not going to, it's at a weak point. It's obviously not like other people have said, like with the hopium glasses, oh yes, there's going to be, the dollar's done, it's finished. No, it's going to take time. But the US is in decline. It is a long decline. It is a decline that's not going to happen, and it's not happening overnight. But in order for the US to protect itself, it is going to continue unleashing more chaos abroad. And so be not surprised that you're going to see another wave of Trump cheering when we get what I believe will happen this year is a ceasefire between an end to the Russia-Ukraine war, managed by, of course, the Trump administration, which again did not come into play just now that he took over. This is something that has been planned before he was in office.
Definitely. Yeah. And I just wanted to throw a quick question in there about your opinion about Tulsi Gabbard's her scandalous description of HTS as being Al-Qaeda and effectively being a US asset, as if, the majority of people, certainly who listen to us, didn't already know that. But again, that's being described or being seen as a part of this image-making process of Trump as being against, or the Trump administration at least being against these kind of more nefarious, insidious operations by the US military and intel. How do you interpret what Gabbard said, basically?
Tulsi Gabbard, like RFK Jr., are there to promote this idea that they are better and more honest and transparent than the establishment Democrats that are there. And they actually, in many ways, are more transparent in terms of just saying the quiet part out loud. For example, when you saw her interaction with the questioning, undergoing this questioning for approval, you couldn't help but hate the guy that was I forget his name now, that was asking her questions, framing it as like she has been favoring Assad, favoring Vladimir Putin. It's just it's so disgusting and far from anything that it made her look like she was some sort of like, to anybody that doesn't know what's going on in politics, it would make her look at her, like she's actually telling the truth against these people. The problem with her is that she is somebody that has shifted her position so many times. And I know this because I've been following her for a long time. I've interviewed her. She started out with Bernie Sanders and running with him in his own campaign in 2015 and 16 when he ran against Hillary Clinton. And she was obviously a Democrat there, but she was all like posing as somebody that was actually anti-establishment, talked about wasteful regime change wars, talked about the surveillance state, added a layer of independent libertarian-ish streak to the Sanders campaign, which brought about all of the people that weren't just on the left, but were independent, because Sanders technically is an independent senator from Vermont. And so that brought that kind of cohesion. And that was seen as extremely dangerous by the establishment. And they shut it down quickly. They rigged that primary election. Hillary Clinton was named the nominee. She was selected to be the nominee in spite of so many other things. And given Gabbard's special ops background, where she's done clear work in special operations and intelligence, she then started shifting to ascending in politics by herself. So she ran against Sanders and against the Republican Party as an independent candidate, but she was already pivoting. She started talking more about the jihadist, Wahhabist movements and all of that, which are true. But then what she would fail to do was with the Israel-Palestine issue, she always pushed a two-state solution, and she focused with her foreign policy in the Middle East. She focused very much on the Wahhabist, radical Islamists that were destroying things, but she never said that the United States is really fully backing it. She said that the United States had operated admissions that didn't help the situation, but she wasn't as flagrant about that, but she would at least mention it. And after that, she then started to 100% pivot towards the right, focusing on Israel and how Israel needs to has the right to defend itself, and how the Palestinians are Hamas is a terrorist group, and Israel has the right to go after them. And she did meet with Bashar al-Assad, right? And she did have that conversation with him. But the way I see Tulsi now, after everything that I've known from her, that I've seen her pivot and change depending on what's most politically expedient, I cannot trust her, even though I have given her credit for some of the good things she has said in the past, where she is focused on the surveillance state, on keeping on standing against unreasonable search and seizures initially, but actually pivoted on that 180 recently. And I can't trust someone like that, because even though she sounds good and she's a great speaker in terms of that, she is not, I don't know where she's coming from or what she thinks tomorrow. She might change her mind. She also always at the end says, I don't like authoritarian dictators like Bashar al-Assad, Vladimir Putin. She gives that in. And when you do that, you
Yeah.
allow that narrative to continue. You allow
Mm,
that narrative to continue and to foment into perhaps pushing more, manufacturing more consent for regime change. And so I do think that, unfortunately, in the United States where we're at, she and RFK Jr. are the lesser of evils. And it really, I hope that they do get in, because then I think people will see that nothing will change once they get in,
mm,
because they're not necessarily in control. And Tulsi
mm,
being intelligence, I think that's actually it's not about who's the better intelligence officer. It's the fact that the intelligence apparatus is there to begin with. So for me,
mm.
like when people say, "Well, she's better," it's like, yeah, she's better than others seemingly, but we really don't know with intelligence, do we? What exactly is their plan?
Yeah, and also for both of them, I mean, you have the most kind of, as you said, flagrant Zionists, or at least
Yeah.
Zionist sympathizers in both of them. So I think that's always going to come to the fore. And as you rightly said, yeah, Hamas were Islamist terrorists, so they were basically conflated with the HTS elements and the ISIS elements, that are effectively proxies of the US and their allies in the region. Turkey's now training ISIS up to take on the Iraqi resistance factions, for example. Turkey being a NATO member state, we have to keep mentioning this. And so, yeah, while they have that Zionist or Christian Zionist ethos deeply embedded in their own psyches, I think there has to be an element of distrust. Even if they're saying absolutely the right thing at any given moment, it still has to be taken as a temporary win. But that distrust should never, that guard should never be put down. That's my opinion
Mm-hmm.
on it. So I think finally, I kind of want to finish off this discussion and kind of come back to Syria and Russia and Saudi Arabia, because we had in the last week, I think it was, this leak of documents that showed that Russia has actually been courting Saudi Arabia since before the special military operation. So it began in 2021, and the military contracts extend into 2026. They are contracts for more than $2 billion worth of air defense systems, and the potential for Russia to actually manufacture on Saudi territory, which is interesting because this is, one would assume, in direct confrontation with the US, who very much perceives Saudi Arabia as one of its kind of vassal states in the region, and the UK definitely does. And, much has been made of President Assad's alleged pivot away from the resistance, meaning Iran, Yemen, Hezbollah, the Iraqi resistance, Palestine, towards the Gulf states. And I'd like to know what you think, but I have a suspicion, and the more that I look into this, and with this leak of the fact that Russia had already been, let's say, forging a partnership with Saudi Arabia pre-2022, I believe that pivot towards the Gulf states was being encouraged by Russia with President Assad, because I think Russia wanted to be the number one strongman, not only in Syria, but in the region. And I think it saw Iran and that entire resistance axis as a threat to its own hegemony, or influence in Syria. And so it would make sense for me that they would try to push Assad, not necessarily away from Iran and Hezbollah, etc., but towards the Gulf states, which necessarily would take Syria away from the resistance axis. I just was interested in your opinion on that, from what you've picked up on also.
Yeah, so living in in Russia, and seeing how, for example, the government operates and how they think. I think I've said this before. It's a
Mm,
very pragmatic government. They are going to do what is needed for them at the moment, especially at a time when they're engaged in a war with the
mm,
collective West, with the, and so this closeness with Saudi Arabia has long been happening. They have had more an increase in bilateral relations with Saudi Arabia. They've been involved in, for example, the re-emerging conversations they were involved between Saudi Arabia, I believe, and Syria. They in a more diplomatic way, and so it wouldn't surprise me that that Bashar al-Assad was influenced by uh, by Russia to actually pivot towards the
mm,
Gulf because of that, because they see the world as in a very diplomatic sense, to the point of where some people are like, why are you including these problematic members? Why are you doing
mm,
business with Israel? Why are you
mm,
having a relationship with the Saudis? So this doesn't surprise me at all. And I would think it's not far-fetched that Assad, who again, we're looking at the recent months of, in 2024, it was a very difficult year for the resistance, the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. You have the genocide in Gaza. You have the use and the continuous uh, pressure to the resistance. You have all of that. And then you have the calculations of, okay, who's going to win this out? If I'm somebody that's pragmatic, who's going to win this out? What's going to happen between Israel Palestine, especially if you have that relationship with Israel where you have the ethnic side of it, where millions of Russians live in Tel Aviv,
mm,
but simultaneously, you know that you have a relationship with Syria where you're fighting these terrorist factions, and also Israel is bombing close to where your military is at. How do you maneuver
mm,
between all of this? And it's very difficult because they have positioned themselves as being this um, peace negotiator in the region. And in a sense, the resistance and Iran don't operate like that. At least they didn't, for a while. I mean, the resistance in Iran under Raisi, um, there was a sense of fighting back. It's not a pacifism. It is a revolutionary spirit that's ideological. It is an ideological belief in opposing the occupier, in opposing Israel as a settler colonial genocidal occupation. So they're going to continue doing that, even if it's not politically expedient. And
yeah,
so it's contradictory to what Russia is and what Russia has been trying to accomplish, which is a peace in the region, a normal diplomatic relationship with everybody else, and that's it. Everybody minds their business. They're a country that's right now engaged in a nationalist approach, not in the Hitler type of nationalism, I have to say, but in a more of a domestically focused type of policy where they're trying to, for example, build Russia's economy, expand it beyond Moscow and St. Petersburg into Central Russia and the Far East. They're focused on that. They're focused on basically creating wealth in the expansion that is the Russia, because it is huge. And so because of that, I don't see them just really vibing with this idea of fighting and fighting and fighting,
mm,
because they don't have that attachment to
yeah,
the resistance sentiment. The Soviet Union had a different approach. They were an ideological uh, entity. They acted as an ideological government they specifically supported the fight against slavery and against apartheid in South Africa and all over Africa. When Russia engages in this, they do so on a basis that's obviously, I'm not saying it's immoral or not moral, but it is essentially on a basis of creating an ability to expand relations economically, to expand relations culturally, to make it so Russians benefit and the other side benefits, similar to China. But I would say even China is more ideologically driven. And so you have that. And I just don't, they, from their point of view, from Russia's point of view, they will work with anybody to get something done. They're not going to put these, well, Saudi Arabia is, killing Yemen. They're participating with Israel. They're not going to do that because they themselves are participating with Israel. They themselves have a relationship with Israel. So essentially, I think that's what it is. And I think you're absolutely on point when you say that, perhaps Assad was influenced by them because they are bringing in this pragmatic approach the same way they wanted him to have conversations with Erdogan. And that's something that was very frustrating to them. And this is now documented that it was frustrating to Russia that Assad would not engage in conversations with Erdogan because they wanted this whole situation resolved, and that's it.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, I guess what also kind of fed into my speculation on that was, I think it was during 2024, the Ansarullah, the Yemeni government, which is constitutionally elected but not recognized internationally, also not by Russia or China or Iran, was expelled from Damascus, or it was asked to leave. I'm not going to say it was expelled. It was asked to leave. And at the time, of course, this was to a degree a shock to those who were following the entire resistance axis. Okay, we knew that there was still communication, of course, between Ansarullah and President Assad and the military factions inside Syria. There wasn't a breakdown in communication, but it was very much sold as, well, if you leave, then that opens the door to Saudi Arabian humanitarian relief, which actually under that era never came, to be honest. And now what we see in the last few days under I'm never going to call him Sharar, but under Jolani, the unelected, illegitimate dictator president of Syria right now, that is introducing nepotism never seen before in the history of Syria. Now, of course, one of the first visits he made was to Saudi Arabia, and then almost immediately we see that the embassy is reopening, but not for the Ansarullah government, for the Saudi proxy government that was actually illegitimate in 2015 when Mansour Hadi resigned and fled the country eventually and asked Saudi Arabia to bomb his own people. And so that, again, is another kind of message when you combine that with Russia's recent meeting in Damascus with Jolani and Bogdanov. It all seems to tie in to me now when I look back over that history where things happened that were seemingly out of character for President Assad and for the Syrian leadership. And for me, Russia always had the upper hand in influence over the presidency. They always did. Historically also, I mean, you mentioned Soviet Union, that the relationship between Syria and the Soviet Union started way back. I mean, after 1946, when they gained independence from the French Mandate, the alliance was always with the Soviet Union, and it continued with Russia. So yeah, I mean, I think Russia's involvement in what happened in Syria, as you said, is probably rooted in their pragmatic philosophy and the potential for a deal with Trump in Ukraine. And again, that's another interesting point. Sorry, I kind of forgot that one. That the proposed summit for Putin and Trump is the UAE or Saudi Arabia. So again, that all of this is pointing towards
Yeah.
undue Russian influence on Syrian policy, which is kind of actually a friend of mine in Syria said to me this morning, when we look at how Russia's behaved in Syria, unfortunately, we can compare it to how the United States behaves. And that really was a kind of a sharp intake of breath from me, because I hope it's not true. I really do. But what is being revealed through what happened in Syria, which was a catastrophic event in the history of the region. Unfortunately, I do think that Russia and many peoples will say this is realpolitik, put their own national interests and security above all else. But then is that Russia first, just like America first? I don't know. I guess time will tell.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think obviously the history that the United States has in toppling and creating and destroying supersedes most, besides you would
Yeah.
say competition is Israel and the UK.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you have that, right? You have that whole history. And unfortunately, what that history does is it forces others to take the same type of response to survive.
Yeah.
And so if you don't want to be a country that is cooed or a country that is completely shut out, most of the time you give in. And then you have a few sectors, a few of the outliers like Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, countries that can't really that are constantly fighting. And because of the way things went down with Syria, a lot of people feel that in Latin America that there's nobody to protect them if that happens there, and especially in Venezuela, where you have two of its biggest allies are Iran and Russia, and clearly there's not a sense of safety right now, and especially since the last time there was the attempted coup where Juan Guaido was named interim president. It was during the Trump administration when there was an attempt to hack the Venezuelan network of payment infrastructure, and all of this happened. That was under the Trump administration. So what you have is what I've been seeing in Latin America is that pivot of normalization attempts to the United States, these conversations between Gurnell and his counterpart, meeting with Nicolas Maduro, all of that. It's people are wondering what exactly is going on. And some people have said this is a good thing. It's a great thing that Trump is doing this. He's promoting diplomacy. Trump's not promoting diplomacy. They're not, the United States doesn't do that. That's the thing. They don't promote diplomacy. They flat out are basically saying either this happens or we will find a way to get rid of you. And I think Venezuela feeling the pressure from Syria, from what happened, I think they are actually, I see them pivoting towards normalizing relations with the US, and I think that's a huge danger. And when you look at what BRICS is doing, its attempt is really, it's a great attempt, but they're also, for example, they invited Saudi Arabia to join, and Saudi Arabia has said that, oh, we're going to pull back for a second. We're not sure. We're going to think about it. It just shows you that you can't just be friends with everybody to the point where you make your own, you basically go against everything you fought for, right? And so, and in essence, again, I go back to the fact that the NATO alliance, the collective, the West, the nefarious empire is very well united and solidified. But the non-aligned axis and sectors in the global South that are actually victims of that have taken a policy of focusing on their own survival. And when you're just surviving on your own, you're not really, you don't have that alliance, and you're facing an enemy that's very powerful and has everything like everything accessible to them to defeat you, you are actually creating your own destruction eventually. And you cannot trust somebody like the United States. We'll have to see what happens with these negotiations between Russia and Ukraine via the United States, and these meetings that have been happening and increasing between the two. But what I see happening is that Russia is eager to normalize relations with the US for economic reasons, for political reasons, for just for being tired of fighting this war since 2022. And they want that normalization pragmatically. Obviously, it's better if we end this war. But I mean, they're going to have to the US is going to have to come with what we've seen so far is the Ukraine will not join NATO, but Ukraine will be a part of the EU. I think that's a potential for coming back because the majority of the EU are part of NATO. So like I just don't I have a hard time trusting that they will let Charlie Brown kick the football this time, because every single time they've taken it away and Russia has been betrayed time and time again. So I don't see I understand why Russia wants to negotiate. I understand that they want to end this, but if they give in even slightly to something that the US could potentially use against them, that NATO could potentially come back with once they pivot again to Russia, because they will, I think we're going to see things go down a very negative way. And Vladimir Putin is not a spring chicken. And unfortunately, there's so many people that would be horrible leaders for Russia. And I do worry about, what happens here in the future.
Yeah. Fee, thank you so much again for, really great insights. And can you let people know again where they can find your work? Obviously at Substack, and I'll put a link in the notes, but if you can also mention where else they can find you and follow you.
Yeah, I'm often on X at Fiorella Isabel M, often very angry there. You can also find me on Truthwire on YouTube, which was formerly the Combo Couch. I do shows Mondays and Fridays there with Pasta at 12:30 Pacific Standard Time, or 12:30 Eastern Standard Time. I'm trying to get my hours, 8:30 p.m. Moscow time. And also I am on Telegram at Fiorella in Moscow. So thank you for having me, Vanessa.
No, it's always a pleasure, and I hope we can keep these conversations going, because it's certainly pretty cathartic for me, and I hope it's it's helpful for people to hear our ramblings. Basically.
Yeah.
Take care, Fee.
I hope.
Speak to you very soon. Bye bye.
Okay. Bye bye.